go ahead and start. Still, do I call to order?
Just say call to order.
Okay, so we'll call to order the Sustainability Committee, or the Climate Action Committee.
All right, roll call. Committee member Breeding? Here. Committee member Cooper?
Here?
Committee member Larson, Chair Larson?
Here.
Vice Chair Martin is not here yet. Committee member Peterson?
Here.
Committee member Way?
Here. So the first order of business is approval of the minutes from last time. Everybody have a chance to review the minutes and a motion?
Move to approve the minutes.
Second.
All in favor of approving the minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Nope. Approved. Good job. All right. We start off the meeting with opportunity for public comment. So anything that's not on the agenda, public can comment on. Do you have anything you'd like to comment on?
Just tell us who you are.
Hi, my name is Susan Clifford, and I'm a resident of Albany. And I just wanted to let you know that it was advertised that there was a meeting about climate action at the community center in Albany. And I was in Pasadena, so I drove back so I could be sure to attend it. And it was from 6 to 8 on Tuesday night. And when I got there, I found out it was canceled. And I don't know who set it up. The people at the community center were really nice, and they apologized for its cancellation and said that it would be rescheduled for January. But I just wanted to let you know, and maybe somebody knows anything about a meeting that was planned at the community center. I just thought I should let you know. Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks.
No, Susan emailed us, and none of us have heard anything about it. We had nothing to do with it, so we're not sure. I'm guessing it was like a community organized meeting and it's being rescheduled, but yeah, we are not sure. No, I haven't had a chance to check in with the community center yet, but we haven't heard anything, and it wasn't organized by the Sustainability Division, so we're not sure.
I don't think it was Albany Climate Action Coalition either, because we haven't asked for
Yeah, that
it.
was my first guess, but then
Yeah.
wasn't that either.
Huh, a mystery. Hello.
Yeah, any other comments from the public? So just an open time to talk about anything not on the agenda. Okay. Go on to the announcements from Lizzie.
Great. So, for our first announcement, sustainability events and resources. Because it's the end of the year, things are a little bit slow right now. But 2 EV opportunities are still available for anyone interested in buying an EV. Well, actually, there's 3. This is updated since I last looked at this. The Bay Area Air Quality Management District's Clean Cars for All program is still open and accepting applications. And as a reminder, it's for income-qualified residents in the Bay Area to retire a vehicle that's older than a certain year. I think it's early 2000s. I want to say 2004 or 2006. They can trade that in and get a rebate for a plug-in hybrid, all-electric, or Clipper card value. So that's an Air District program that's still accepting applications.
It's kind of nice. I've never heard that before.
Drive Clean Bay Area is a group purchase collaborative that's open through December 31st. Similar to SunShares, by organizing bulk purchases, they're bringing down the costs of EVs significantly. They have 11 electric or hybrid models available right now, and the discounts are up to $1,300 to $6,000 off the MSRP, and that's on top of the federal tax credit, state rebate, and the PG&E rebate. More can be found out at drivecleanbayarea.org. And again, just to emphasize, the program's only open through December 31st, 2019. So if anyone's New Year's resolution is to get a new vehicle, they should do it before the ball drops on New Year's Eve. So if you know anyone, let them know. As I mentioned, we have a quiet rest of 2019, but we have a couple exciting things going on in 2020. I'll just give you a preview for if you want to mark your calendars. On April 18th, 2020, it's the 50th anniversary of Earth Day, and we'll be having a shoreline cleanup. On May 9th is this year's citywide garage sale. May 16th will be the Memorial Park cleanup and compost giveaway, and there are other rec department cleanups throughout the year as well. And we're planning, in addition to another workshop Bianca will be explaining in a sec, we're hosting a recycling/composting workshop in early 2020, a community workshop. So be on the lookout for more information about that. And I'll hand it over to Bianca for the next announcement.
Great. So while there has been one meeting at the community center canceled, I have another meeting at the community center that I will be hosting in part. So on Sunday, January 26th, we're going to be hosting a workshop kind of called the Community Climate Action Meeting, Help Build a Healthy and Sustainable Albany. And it will be kind of a two-part workshop. So the first part will have a speaker from 350.org named Alana Engel, and she'll be talking about electrification and kind of doing education on fossil fuel alternatives for homes and businesses, cars, space and water heating for Albany community members. So that'll be for the first hour. And then this event will also be kind of a kickoff day for the Carbon Free Albany 2020 Challenge. And so, as you all know, Carbon Free Albany is the community-based carbon reduction platform here. And so I will be delivering a presentation, kind of giving an overview of the platform and kind of announcing the 2020 challenge, which is going to run from January 26th through June 7th. So during that time, Albany community members we're encouraging Albany community members to register for the platform and to kind of participate in some friendly competition against each other to reduce the most carbon dioxide by June 7th. And the team that has reduced the most by June 7th, we are going to host a celebration event for everyone, and they will be receiving a prize. So this is kind of a new push for the Carbon Free Albany platform that I'm helping out with. And it would be great if you all could save the date on your calendars. We are also hoping, as part of this event, we're going to be serving a light lunch at the end, and it would be great to kind of use that time as a way for folks in the room to kind of talk with each other, ask questions, and it would be great to have some kind of climate representatives in the room who could answer some of those questions, just talk about what the city is doing, and potentially register folks on the platform as well and answer questions about that. So yeah, that's my announcement for January 26th event.
What's the time?
Sorry about that. Yeah, the time is 11 to 1, and it'll be in the community center.
And what was the first part you said, the community fund?
I don't,
What was that? So
I'm not sure what I said about the community.
it's a city-sponsored event.
Yeah, it's a city-sponsored event. Sorry for any confusion.
But I think what he was referring, what was the official name of the event?
Oh, yeah, the event is titled Community Climate Action Meeting, Help Build a Healthy and Sustainable Albany. So yeah, a kind of two-part event with electrification resources and carbon-free Albany.
And it's 1 to...
11 a.m. to 1 p.m. on the 26th.
Is the information posted on the city website?
I just created a calendar event on the city website. I just finished up that wording today, so I will soon be sending out more information about that through other channels as well, like the e-news.
Was there going to be any, you mentioned at the end having the opportunity to talk more about what Albany's doing. So is there going to be any formal presentation of the new climate action and adaptation plan now that it's been approved by city council, or is
We
that...
have not kind of, I think we wanted to keep that time open to be flexible, and I think we're still thinking about the format of that, whether we want kind of more like a breakout group session and people can gravitate towards certain topics that they're interested, that could potentially be a topic. So I think that's something we're still thinking through and would be open to input for.
Yeah, okay, well, and we had met and talked about this, so I'll work with you on maybe getting that some more, if it's okay, some more part of that talks about the climate action adaptation plan, so people that attend do know there's a larger framework that this is all happening in, yeah.
I think that's a good idea.
Okay, good.
Thank you, Bianca. Okay, our next update is about the all-electric ordinance that you all saw at your October meeting or September meeting. I have some news. Some of you may have heard this. The city of Berkeley, who had adopted the same pathway to the ordinance, they followed the same pathway to the ordinance that we were following. They are being sued by the California Restaurant Association, asking the federal court to, I'm forgetting the legal language, but saying that it's unenforceable, saying that it's a violation of state and federal law. And at the same time, we were planning on bringing it to council on December 16th, but our city attorney, Craig Labide, he's retired, so he was not at the meeting last Monday, and we wanted to make sure that we could have legal counsel take a look at our ordinance and walk us through next steps and what they think the best path is given the lawsuit against Berkeley. And our new city attorney will be starting in the new year, so we should be able to have a discussion sometime in January or February. We'll take a closer look at the ordinance and discuss next steps then. So right now, the all-electric amendment to the planning code is on pause. But we will update you once we know more.
So when you say we're going to discuss, is that a council discussion or a staff discussion?
It's a discussion with our city attorney and then probably also a council discussion. But I think first it'll be
Staff
and the city attorney to make sure that we're doing it in a way where we also won't get sued. And because we want an ordinance that's enforceable, and we don't want to just bring up an ordinance that's has no teeth. So we'll have to take a second look given the change.
So we don't have, I mean, it seems like the first thing that attorney should do is talk to the Berkeley city attorney about what they think. Frankly, it's an industry-based suit. It's by, manufacturers of gas appliances. They're going to lose possible sales in Berkeley, and it doesn't have anything to do with the gas industry itself. So
It's filed by the Restaurant Association.
Right, the Restaurant Association, which is all about restaurant equipment. That's what it's about. So again, I'd hate to see us just stick our head back in the sand just because of some industry group put a lawsuit in because they have some sort of interest in not having their equipment not be sold in Berkeley anymore. So it'd be nice if attorney to attorney were talking and it wasn't, we can't craft something that will be 0% of potential litigation. And I don't think that should be our goal either. Certainly we want something that can achieve what we want and not be a magnet for frivolous lawsuits or just, dragging us down. But I was rather encouraged to see it wasn't the gas industry itself that was going after it. It was really a special interest group that sees its market share, being threatened by this coming into place, rather than expending their energy on developing electric equipment.
Yeah.
So.
I'm assuming definitely be a discussion with the city of Berkeley, but I will bring back more updates once we know more.
And when do we get our new city attorney?
Starting in the new year.
Oh, okay. So it starts in January. Huh?
Mm-hmm.
Can I add a comment on that? I had dinner at a restaurant on College Avenue across from Safeway. I think it's called Southie, and it's a pretty nice place that I would recommend. But I noticed that they had all-electric heating equipment. It was a small place, so I talked to the cook at the time, or the chef, and I think it's actually not a totally unreasonable concern from a restaurant standpoint, because he said that Well, first of all, anyone who cooks with gas appreciates the high flame and the controllability if you're doing stir frying or something like that. But he also said that the time it takes to cook is longer because of this temperature effect. And it's true that he had rather small equipment, but he definitely was complaining about the performance. And so I could see that affecting someone's business, both on the performance, not to say that it couldn't be improved, but also on the throughput and also on the cost, because they use a lot of energy. So imagine like a pizza shop, which is using gas furnace like Domino's, which turns over a lot of pizzas. So I wouldn't say that it's frivolous. I mean, I would understand it. And also what you hear from homeowners is, you know, they don't necessarily want to give up their gas stoves because, I mean, you know, you get used to that and you're comfortable with that. So you know, I just wanted to throw that out there.
Thank you. All right. Next update on our climate action and adaptation plan. Exciting news. On December 2nd, at their regular meeting, our city council unanimously adopted the climate action and adaptation plan with a few minor changes. Those changes were the interim target, which was discussed at your last meeting. They changed it from 60% at 2035 to 70% at 2035, keeping the 2045 carbon neutrality goal. There was also a small wording change on page 8 in the electrification box. And we also included more language in the plan to clearly defer to a new active transportation plan for specifics about active transportation measures. So today we're having a discussion about implementation.
I just wanted to say to Nick and Max, thanks for pushing for that last meeting. I was impressed with that the city council actually took our recommendation and did something with it. So I learned something in the city politics arena there, so that was good. Thank you.
Yeah, it's interesting. You should watch how it all is discussed out because, frankly, the whole thing almost got sunk by one of the council members. And I think Nick Pilch sort of pulled it out of the fire and made this compromise. And it all moved forward. But, you know, there was a lot of you know, again, it's this nervousness around the elimination of gas and being concerned about lawsuits and all these other things, which when you think about the earth going down the toilet, you know, it's like kind of the last thing we should be worrying about. But anyway, that's how it happened. So it was good to have, we had 3 people there besides myself. Preston Jordan and Ian McLeod also spoke and touched on that. So, you know, having more of an acceleration in reductions earlier on, and then, you know, that's going to be key. So we'll be monitoring this with metrics, and it'll be interesting to see how we do.
All right, thanks for the update. So there's no presentations tonight. So we'll go into the discussion of the action items, the green building update.
Perfect. So I'd like to introduce Michelle Plaus, our new community development intern. And those are the papers that are up on the dais that have some of her analysis on Tier 1 and Tier 2 residential. I'll just point that out, but then I'm going to hand it over to Michelle for a presentation, and then she'll be able to answer some questions you have about Cal Green, because she's become our Cal Green expert.
Well, hi, everyone. It's nice to meet you all. Yeah, I'm Michelle Plaus, new intern. Started a few weeks ago. And just a little bit about me. I actually studied classics, like ancient history and stuff in college. And so it's a little bit funny that I'm here doing this now, but you know, I've always been interested in and cared a lot about the environment. I studied ancient effects on the environment back in school, and so I decided to kind of bring it more into the modern now and work with the city and try to research some of this cool stuff. So yeah, I've been researching the Cal Green tiers for the last few weeks and kind of putting together some cost-benefit analyses and looking into what other cities have been doing. And so that's what I'm going to talk about today. So you can see here, this is just sort of Okay. Yes, so this is just a little bit of a background refresher on the tiers. So starting on January 1st, the new version of Cal Green is going to be implemented that has all new mandatory measures that will be required across the state. And then beyond those mandatory measures, anyone can choose to do the voluntary Tier 1 and Tier 2, and any city can require it as an extra step up of mandatory requirements if they choose to. So that's what's on the table. Tier 1 is a series of measures that kind of go beyond the mandatory, that add extra things or make requirements more stringent. And then Tier 2 goes another step above that. And as you can see, it gets greener as we go up the pyramid here, right? And those measures are split into 5 different categories, which you can see on the side here. And if you take a look in the handouts you've been given, that kind of summarizes, just to give you a taste of what some of these measures look like in each of the categories. And I won't go through all of them, but there's a pretty large variety. And then in each category, there's also electives, of which there are many, so I didn't put them on the paper. But there's for each tier, there's different amounts of electives you have to choose. So there's multiple cities that have been on Tier 1 for several years now in the area. Here's a list. There might be more, but it's kind of hard to get all the information. So these ones are definitely on Tier 1. And on the side here, you can see a quote. This is from the Assistant Director of Community Development from Davis. And I asked him how he felt about Tier 1 and how it's been working for the city, and this is what he said. He says, "We chose to adopt Tier 1 because we've had a green building ordinance in place since 2008. We chose not to adopt Tier 2 because many of the measures are not feasible and may not be practical for most projects. Tier 1 is very achievable. We've been requiring it since 2011. We also require Tier 1 for alterations and additions." So just his thoughts on that. Berkeley, just about 2 weeks ago, passed a new REACH code, which is only for new construction, and kind of cherry picks from the tiers. So they have an energy requirement that is a little bit less stringent than Tier 1 would be. They also have construction waste requirements similar to Tier 1, EV requirements similar to Tier 2, and cement requirements similar to Tier 2. So they kind of picked a few things out of the tiers that they wanted to focus on. And then Palo Alto is the only city that we know of that has been on Tier 2. And they use Tier 2 for new construction and Tier 1 for renovations. And I'd also just want to note that because the mandatory requirements have been lifted or are going to be, moved up in 2020, the tiers are also being moved up along with that. So the version of the Tier 1 and Tier 2 that will be will be implemented in 2020 is new and will not have actually been implemented by any of these cities before. They've been on the old versions of Tier 1 and Tier 2. So that's just something to keep in mind, just as we think through all this. All right, so here's
When did you say it was going to be updated?
it's going to be implemented on January 1st, 2020. That's when it goes into effect. Yeah, so all of this is for the new version that is about to go into effect.
So the cities that are on Tier 1 and Tier 2 are using Tier 1 and Tier 2, will it automatically, the new versions go into effect in those cities, or do they have to readopt them?
I believe they will go automatically into effect again. So and so it'll be their first time doing the new version of Tier 1 as well.
And they've changed. The Tier 1 and Tier 2 have changed.
Yeah, Tier 1 and Tier 2 have changed along with the mandatory requirements, yes. So this is just an overview of some of the main benefits for Tier 1 and Tier 2. This is for residential. And the big one is greenhouse gas reductions for households. As you can see here, Tier 1 is about a 50% reduction per household, and Tier 2 is 100%. Tier 2 actually requires zero net energy homes. So that's a pretty big one. And this is kind of the biggest thing of the...
New construction.
Yes, for new construction. Yes, this is all for new construction. There's also water use reductions, depending on the electives someone chooses. We're looking at somewhere from 8 to 35% or 15 to 40%. EV readiness. So for Tier 1, about 20% of parking spaces would need to be EV ready, and all garages and single-family homes. For Tier 2, 30%. There would also be kind of citywide greenhouse gas reductions, largely coming from cement reductions and waste reductions in construction and demolition. And then also volatile organic chemical emission reductions. Non-residential is pretty similar, but slightly different numbers. The greenhouse gas reductions are quite a bit smaller for non-residential. And the water use reductions are also a little bit smaller. Similar EV readiness, and the same with the cement and waste and VOCs. And this is just to help us connect it to the Climate Action Plan. A lot of the measures in Tier 1 and Tier 2 are very closely tied to our Climate Action Plan goals. So obviously our carbon neutrality by 2045, we have greenhouse gas reductions. That would help us go a pretty long way towards that goal. We also have been planning to adopt an EV readiness ordinance. So this could work as that ordinance, basically. Using low carbon concrete is in the Climate Action Plan, and that's also in the tiers. Reducing overall waste. We want to get 95% reduction by 2045. And the construction and demolition waste ordinance would help us move towards that goal. Water conservation. There's also a goal of reducing and slowing water runoff, which would be aided by the permeable paving measure in Tier 1 and Tier 2, and also improving public health, which would be aided by reducing the organic chemical emissions. So this is a kind of estimate of what the costs might be for these tiers. Obviously, there's a lot of different variables that go into this, but this is an estimate to get a sense of scale here. So for a single-family home, it would probably be an increased cost of around $6,500 with a return on investment of about 10 years. For Tier 2, it takes a pretty big jump up to around $20,000.
Are these statistics from KALB?
So this is based on my own research. I went through all the measures here and did some estimates of what the different costs would be. And the majority of the costs that you see here come from solar requirements, which I'll get into on the next slide. So I'll explain a little bit more about how these numbers come about. But yeah, so you can see here, and then for multifamily, and for...
Sorry, just to follow up on the question.
Yeah.
Is there any cost estimate in the code or any other,
No.
Did you find any similar benchmarking from, Palo Alto or Berkeley or anything?
Yeah, unfortunately, there wasn't any kind of overarching cost estimate that it came with. It didn't even really come with cost estimates for any of the measures, so I had to do a lot of that piecemeal on my own.
And I'll just put in, we were very appreciative because Michelle was actually calling local installers to see what they would estimate, different kinds of products and appliances would cost, installation costs, and to purchase the actual equipment. So she did a lot of research into this, so we're very appreciative.
So so what I worry a little bit about is if you didn't comply at all, you're putting in something different. Was that cost backed out, or is it just the cost to put in the stuff that you're required to do, or is everything additive on top of what you would put in anyway? For example, like a heating system, instead of putting in, like if you go all electric and you have maybe some solar that's backing that up, then you're not going to put in a forced air furnace system or something. There's savings in there too. So what I get worried about these kind of cost estimates is they tell you everything that costs, but then they don't tell you what you're saving. So I worry a little bit about how the numbers were established.
Yeah, there's definitely limitations to this. There were a lot of pieces of information that weren't very easy to get, but I did my best to try to make sure that I was subtracting the savings as much as possible. And when I was calling the people, the installers and whatnot, I was trying to ask about that as well, trying to get as much information as I can about incremental costs, not just overall. So
Do you take into account rebate programs and things like that?
yes, this does take into account, especially the federal solar rebate. That's the biggest, the most important one for these numbers. So I took that into account. That is going down over time. So I kind of had to estimate based on, when people would be installing these, but yeah.
May not, though, depending on federal administrations, so.
Yes, there's also that, yes. So, overall, of course, you should take these numbers with plenty of grains of salt, but it's just to give you a sense of what the kind of scale is likely to be.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's great,
You're welcome.
That's really
Would be good
impressive.
to, when you show statistics like this, if you say, this is based on a median home, construction cost of $150,000 to build a home, and you're going to add $6,500 or whatever it is, because then you get the scale
Yeah.
of like what percent are you increasing the construction cost by?
Yeah, we can add that.
That's another way of looking at this, because in isolation, that number, you have to have something to relate it to.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. We can put that on the list of things to research after this.
And then the return on investment, is that usually based on solar systems savings that then wipes out the expense and then is a cost benefit after that?
Yes, it would be.
Yeah, so
Yes.
that's really good to know.
Yes,
Wow.
yes, correct. And I also want to point out that the last one, the non-residential, those numbers are pretty heavily estimated. I'm working on getting better numbers for that right now, but I had issues getting access to the program that helps me actually get the energy use data. So hopefully we'll have a more specific update on that in the future as well. So this is about the solar. So the 2020 version of CalGreen uses a new metric for energy use called EDR. And the way it works is up at the top here, 100 points for EDR is equivalent to a 2006 compliant home, and 0 is zero net energy. And there are requirements for what number each building has to be at based on climate zone and other factors. And so our mandatory is about 34 starting in 2020. Tier 1 requires 14 or 10 depending on what kind of fuel the home has, and Tier 2 is 0. And just so you know, this is a little bit of a difficult metric. The only way you can actually get these numbers is by using this special software program that puts in all the information about the building and everything. So it's a little bit tricky, but what's helpful about it is that the percentage-wise, the 34 to 14, it's about 50% to 60% reduction in greenhouse gas use, to give you a sense of like what that actually looks like. And so that's where I got those numbers earlier that you saw in the benefits. And what's interesting also is that in order to get to that mandatory mark in 2020, all new homes are going to have solar panels. So that's going to be a new requirement. There are some exceptions to that, but generally speaking, all homes are going to need solar panels. So in order to get to the Tier 1 level, there will be some more efficient design components to the home, but also you just need a larger solar system. So it'll just be the added cost of increasing the size of the solar system, not of putting one in the first place.
And that's for all climate zones then, huh?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yes. Yes. Big changes. For Tier 2, it's a little bit bigger. You have to make the solar system even larger, and then you also need to have a battery installed as well, and that increases the cost quite a bit, and increases the return on investment as well. And this is really where most of the cost of these tiers comes in. The majority of the other measures are pretty low cost. Some of the electives are quite expensive, but they're just electives. But yeah, the majority of the other things on these lists that I printed out here are sometimes free, sometimes, $100, $200. Things like getting an Energy Star washing machine, something like that. The increased cost is not very high. So this is really where the majority of the increased cost comes in. It's expanding the solar system, and in the case of Tier 2, adding a battery as well.
So the zero net energy,
Yeah.
that's just of the building usage, right? So if you have an EV and you're using the solar system, it has to be even beyond that. Or are you able to factor in your vehicle use as offsetting building?
That's a good
energy
question. I'm
use?
not sure about that. I think it doesn't include an EV. It's just for the building, as far as I know. And last little note here on the side, in order to adopt either of these tiers, the city needs to complete a CEC evaluation to determine basically whether these would be cost effective for the city.
CEC as in California Energy Commission?
Yeah.
Well,
What is that? What is that evaluation?
Yeah, basically it's a study of the different efficiency measures and the size of the solar system, and it's basically a closer study of what the cost and return would be on adopting either of these tiers, and decides whether that would be a cost-effective measure, and they have different calculations to decide whether or not that's cost-effective. A lot of cities that are on the Tier 1 list have done these evaluations and have passed, basically, to be allowed to do Tier 1 without any issues. There have been some issues for Tier 2, for the new one, for zero net energy. There are some studies that say it's not cost-effective, so that could be a problem if we were trying to go for Tier 2, but for Tier 1, it probably wouldn't be an issue.
so, every project's different, even in residential. So how would you provide information on that? You just do an idealized home and say, well, we do it this way and we do it
Yeah,
the
they
other way.
they use prototype homes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I'll just note on the logistical side, if we were to file with the CEC, it would be 30 days, I believe, for them to review it. So that's just something we have to keep in mind moving forward, that if we decide to adopt a tier with the energy efficiency measures, we just have to give some time to get that approval to be able to make it an ordinance.
Right, and who prepares the evaluation that you give to the CEC? Does staff do that, or do you hire a consultant?
So we're speaking with East Bay Community Energy on Friday. They have hired consultants to do some of this analysis, and I believe they could help us or prep us for some of that analysis. So information on that, TBD. We'll know more on Friday.
And then how does this apply with Berkeley's approach, which was cherry picking from T1 and T2? Did they have to,
Yeah, they had to do a CEC evaluation.
based just on the cherry picked items?
Yes.
Okay.
Right.
So just going backwards just for a moment, so the mandatory, is this California-wide and cities don't have to adopt it, it's just what's mandatory, is that right?
Yeah, the mandatory is California-wide.
Mandatory is mandatory for
Yeah,
everybody across the
just
state. Okay, good.
mandatory for everybody.
And that's, okay, so solar panels on all new homes is mandatory.
Yes.
Okay. Nice.
Yes.
And then the tiers are to the cities to decide if they're going to adopt the tier
That's
1 or tier
correct.
2. Okay.
Yes.
Thanks.
Yes.
So I just comment on this, that maybe buried in this or maybe not so buried is that if you have a mixed fuel home with natural gas, then the way you're moving down that rating scale is just building more and more solar PV. But for the purposes of emissions, that really doesn't help much because you still have the natural gas. You're not really offsetting CO2, you're offsetting these EDR points. So you can't really get to zero net carbon. You can get to the zero net energy per this funky definition, but let's just not miss that point, because I think if we can go to an all-electric new home ordinance similar to Berkeley, then it kind of just switches us to the all-electric track. We can get to zero carbon, but once we have natural gas, no amount of solar is ever going to offset the emissions, unless it's negative, but that's not going to happen. So
Yes,
just keep that
absolutely.
in mind. Yeah.
Yes.
So net zero energy tier 2 could be a mixed fuel home.
Yeah, potentially if you had a big enough solar panel to offset that.
Yeah, I mean, you could physically do that, but in principle, you're not going to be allowed to do that because it's too big of a solar PV size. So you're going to be just pumping out solar PV back to the grid when you don't need it.
Yeah,
So-
which is why you need the
so it's
battery
really
as
not
well,
allowed.
so you
It's
don't
I
really
don't
not
see how
allowed
you could
at
have
this
a
point.
tier 2, yeah,
So-
okay.
Not with mixed fuel.
Unless you were making gas out of, anyway, never mind.
Yeah, and also, yeah, so that's why you need the battery so you don't overload the grid. That's why it's required for the tier 2 level. And yeah, most of my calculations for this, I used electric, like all electric, just kind of assuming that all electric ordinance would pass sometime soon. So yeah, the mixed fuel definitely presents some new problems to it. Yeah. Oh yes, and another thing, there's definitely a question as to what the city should do if they adopt one of the tiers about renovations. All the things I've put here are for new construction, which is obviously not the major type of construction in Albany. And there's kind of a lot of ways that the city could go with new construction, how they choose to implement it. So Berkeley passed their new code that has those new ordinances, but only for new construction, and they're still trying to kind of figure out what to do about renovations. Palo Alto did tier 2 for new and tier 1 for renovations. There's lots of different options, so it's something to kind of think about. Like for instance, the city could say, if you take a look at the pages here, that the required ones for tier 1 have to be done if they're relevant to the renovation, but not the electives. Or you could cherry pick some things that need to be done on certain kinds of renovations. There's different decisions that we could make about when the solar requirements come into play. So yeah, lots of things to think about, lots of variables, something to kind of put out there.
And I mean, that's the key, since I don't know what the number is, but it's probably only 1 or 2 buildings a year, if that.
And also, so Claire Bianca and I were at a meeting yesterday with Alameda County Sustainability Energy people, and I brought it up how we were facing the renovation conundrum, and Berkeley told me that they'll be considering this at the mid-cycle, so Michelle and I will probably be in contact with Berkeley, and then also we're hopefully getting in touch with some folks from Bayren who may be able to help us think through it as well. So the renovations part is, we're pursuing it.
Question on the renovations for someone like Berkeley, which is requiring tier 1. What is the trigger for a renovation, or what is the threshold for a renovation? Because I'm just thinking that there's a lot of work that is being done since the stock is very old, but a lot of it is not necessarily permitted, or maybe some of it's unpermitted and should be permitted. But I'm just wondering because I think that's a critical piece. I'm just wondering what is the definition of a renovation,
Or
what triggers
threshold.
what triggers any type of requirements for those 5 criteria for renovation or retrofits.
Yeah, I think it's if it requires a building permit, but I think it can also vary. Also, just to note, Berkeley isn't on tier 1. They just cherry-picked a few things, and they're only doing it for new construction. So that wouldn't be relevant for Berkeley, but for a place like Davis or something, it would be.
I mean, if somebody's going to remodel their bathroom, they pull a permit. But, I mean, they're not touching anything related to the energy of the home, water, but, it probably needs to be like a percentage of the footprint that you're adding or modifying to kick it in, something that would.
Yeah, I think that's one of the big questions is, you're not going to require them to put in a whole solar system because they took out the tub, right?
Right.
That
Well,
doesn't.
well, and a lot of these Cal Green things are focused on new construction. I mean, the new home comes up to higher standard. So I'm thinking like a lot of times you have certain things in the code, like if you're doing an old bathroom and it's got all, incandescent fixtures, you're going to bring it up to more energy efficient light fixtures, things like that. So that would have to comply. But you wouldn't trigger completely changing the whole house, put a solar system on the roof, right? But then you get into major remodels where you're gutting the house and adding a second floor and doing a whole bunch of stuff and changing out building systems like water heater and furnace. And in that case, do any of the other cities apply the tiers to those?
I don't actually know for certain. I wasn't able to get really clear information about when they trigger it, but we can look into it more and hopefully try to find something. Maybe my buddy in Davis can tell me something.
I appreciate the point Max is raising, and what Tom has also reiterated is, in Albany, a brand new home, you might get one or two a year at most, but remodels are vastly more up there. Now, that's a little different with the ADU thing. People are building all new ADUs. And I think is there a requirement for the ADUs to meet the CalGreen at certain tiers, or can that be done, or is that worked into any of the ADU?
Yeah, that would work you could definitely do it for an ADU. I don't know if necessarily every measure would apply in that case. It would kind of depend, but you could definitely apply it to an ADU.
But I know right now most of the ADUs happening in Albany don't have solar systems on them, so. I mean, again, it's that's something maybe we need to consider is do we treat the ADU as a total new structure and it now needs to meet a certain tier? We could be separated out from remodels or something.
Yeah.
Just to jump in for a second. I'm also in contact with someone from the Stop Waste Agency, who works on a variety of climate measures about specifically ADU construction and electric and all that, because when you are looking at research of just energy comparisons among houses for all electric, new construction, ADUs are kind of absent from the picture. So I am in conversation with some folks about that currently.
Good.
Any other questions about it or anything?
Is that it?
Yeah, that's my whole presentation. So if you have any more questions for me, go for it.
Yeah. Any questions or comments from the public?
Hi, good evening. Ian McLeod, I'm on the Planning and Zoning Commission. Brought up a lot of great points. I heard a lot of great points by staff and by commissioners. Great point about net zero energy versus zero emissions. It's not the same thing. In general, I'm inclined to go big when you do these things, but I wouldn't say that Tier 2 would be a blanket thing to adopt or Tier 1 necessarily, but I think it's a line item kind of thing I would propose going through line by line and judging whether it really makes sense per each item. And that's going to take some time and effort. I'd be happy to participate in that. This is kind of the silo effect of local government, where planning and zoning has a lot of expertise in this, but we're not involved in this decision-making, where I literally deal with these things as an architect and builder. So I have a lot of expertise with this. I did a project in Palo Alto where it sure seemed like Tier 2. We had pages of checklists and things, and it was actually kind of a menu we were able to choose. You were able to choose from the electives so that it became what was appropriate and feasible for that project, what you felt like you could achieve. The other point I'd like to make is that in the CAP 1.0, it said adopt Tier 2 energy efficiency measures. That was 10 years ago.
Oh.
And where have we been in 10 years? We have had no green building standards besides the basic mandatory CalGreen. And I think if we're going to hit the targets that we have on our climate action and adaptation plan, we're going to have to make it more stringent for new buildings and also for remodels. And on the subject of remodels, the city has plenty of thresholds for triggering additional requirements, 25% of floor area, 50% for some things, and then, an added amount of a certain square footage to an existing house triggers other things, and the Tier 1, Tier 2 kind of thing could be aligned with those kind of milestones. So there are ways to integrate it. I agree, you don't want to have a bathroom remodel trigger some crazy whole house thing that's really kind of destructive to the house, and people will just not get permits. So we don't want to do that. I'd be happy to work with anybody, with you on your subcommittee and with staff. I'd like to get away a little bit from the silo effect and bring a lot more expertise into this.
You're on. We're going to contact you, Ian.
Well, I'm willing to do it.
We have a green building
really believe in
subcommittee.
this stuff, and I think tier 2, what I've read, I mean, not all of them are that burdensome. I think it's a difficult call with solar and batteries. I'm not sure the batteries are really there yet. They're still really expensive, and I know it's coming. So maybe, there will be an evolution of adopting certain items. But the goal is absolutely 100% renewables on the roof and battery backup, and that's resilience. Then when the power's shut off, you hit your transfer switch, and your home stays operable, and et cetera, et cetera. So, and it gets us to zero emissions as well. So that's the goal, so I would try to align all the policy measures in that respect. So thank you.
Great, thanks. Any other questions or comments? Public?
I had just a question on the non-residential. On the residential, there's a cement reduction item, but I didn't see that on non-residential, and I would have thought that it would be, as important on the commercial side. So that was just a question on the worksheets.
Yes, the cement reduction, I believe, is one of the electives for material conservation and non-residential, which is why it doesn't show up on here. But if you took a look at the electives that are available, that would probably be the one that most people chose. So it would effectively work for non-residential as well.
And thank you. And then on the costs, I know that it was just a kind of approximate estimate, but for something like the materials, which I think is becoming increasingly important, like cement reduction, recycled content, construction waste, again, it was a little bit hard for me to assess the cost or the impact of doing that. So did you make an effort to bake those?
Yeah, that was a tricky one.
Also, okay.
The way that I approached that, I have a family friend who has been doing home renovations for many years. So I called him up and asked him what he thought about it. And he said that a lot of these types of materials are really common in the market now and generally don't cost more than the more average mandatory materials. And similar with with recycling, it generally doesn't cost very much more. Sometimes it can even cost a little bit less. So yeah, that's kind of anecdotal, but that was, and I just went to the source to try and get some info.
Construction demolition waste.
Yeah, that's interesting, because then a related question might be, well, if it's 20% tier 1, 25% for cement reduction or recycled content, why wouldn't it be 35% or 50% or 100%? It just kind of begs the question. So
yeah, the cement
I'm just
reduction numbers.
Curious about that.
Yeah, the cement reduction numbers. It's like the amount of cement in the concrete. So I know there is a certain limit at which the concrete is no longer
that's
effective.
true. Yeah, sure.
I think you could go farther than these numbers based on what I've seen, but I think they're kind of trying to test it out and see how effective the concrete is. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, that was very complete. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
So moving on to the Climate Action Adaptation Plan implementation. And Lizzie, you have something to share with us?
Okay, so as I mentioned in the announcements, our CAP was unanimously adopted with a few minor changes. So the next day, we started taking a look at our implementation spreadsheet that was started by our consultants and then populated. Staff took a look at it and we populated some of the cells and touched it up a bit, and that is what was attached to your agenda packet. So today we'll be discussing, having the implementation or preliminary discussion about the implementation plan. Lots of P's in there. Okay, so as you noticed, there are a few columns on the CAP implementation spreadsheet. The first column is with the action ID, and that's directly related to what the number of the action is in the CAP. And then the action is the specific language from the CAP that describes the policies, programs, ordinances, or other general steps that will be taken to meet the goal. The agency partner is who we see being another public agency that will likely be working on similar actions, or a partner in implementing, both a partner in staff time and also funding. In some cases, the partner may be the lead agency for implementation. So for example, some of these actions that are specific to waste maybe will play a big role in it, but stop waste will be the jurisdiction that will really get the program started.
That relates to that.
The next column is implementation steps, and those are the steps that right now we see will be taken to complete that action. And then the metrics are the measurements of effectiveness and or deliverables for the action. I'll get into this after. Here's the slide. So as I mentioned, we went through and we populated the implementation plan based on what we today in December 2019 see the steps being, but we expect that this plan, or we plan for this plan, to be a very flexible working document that we can change based on, oh, funding is available for this action, let's change the implementation steps and do this. So we don't want it to be a document that is fixed, because that kind of limits our ability to pursue things based on when resources and funding are available. And then it'll be maintained by our City of Albany staff, likely mostly our sustainability division, and we'll change it as things change. For prioritization of implementation, it's important to keep in mind that we have a few things that really influence the prioritization of when and how things will get done. A few of those things are City Council strategic goals and priorities, direction from City Council, availability of funding. Some of these measures are very expensive, and we won't be able to pursue them until we've identified a way to pay for them. Some of them also depend on advancements in technology. Someone brought up that battery storage is still developing, so some of our measures that directly reference battery storage, for example, we'll have to wait till some of that technology develops so that we can take advantage of that. Also the priorities of partner agencies, because like I mentioned, we'll be working with many other jurisdictions to implement this plan. And if they have the resources and the funding, we'll work with them. If they're unable to begin something, it would be hard for us to do it on our own for some of these. Also, we want to prioritize based on the biggest bang for our buck, so greenhouse gas reductions potential, and as also our CAC priorities, because you are an advisory body and also representative of the community. So our recommendation today is that the CAC provide, we envision as everyone provides their top 5 priorities. If you were able to take a look at the plan and pick out 5 implementation priorities that can help us plan for the next 2 years to see what we'll really get started on implementing. So if everyone could share their top 5, then we can open it up to discussion and then narrow down maybe a CAC top 5 priorities.
I have one question. This is about a specific action on the plan. Is this the time to ask questions about those, or should I wait?
Yeah, if you have a question about an action from the CAP?
Yeah. So just 1.1.1, it says develop a new active transportation plan.
Yes.
Does this mean develop a plan or develop and implement the plan?
It would be develop a plan, and then the implementation would probably belong to the transportation division. So one of the requirements that we changed for the CAP to be adopted by council was that we changed the language in the plan to be more clear that we're deferring to a new active transportation plan, and that the CAP itself isn't an active transportation plan, that the CAP itself isn't an active transportation plan. So the action would be to help develop that plan, and then after that plan's developed, it will be implemented.
Okay. Which of the transportation measures would you say is the most immediate?
Well, some of them are ongoing, but you mean from ones that are not started?
Yeah.
Can I look at that?
What do you mean by immediate?
Well, it's probably the ATP, based on if we do have funding, because a lot of these are also implementing some of these actions would be based on having a plan that says how's the best way to do it. So we're hoping to get an active transportation plan started as soon as we can, based on when we can identify funding, because it will be an expensive process.
Wonderful, thank you.
So Eric, did you want to have a certain order we all go through on this, or did you?
Did you have more, or is it?
That's all I have, unless anyone has questions before we get into the discussion.
Questions? Yeah, so how do you want us to do our top 5?
Well, up to you, but I think I would recommend that maybe if we went down the line and everyone said their top 5, and then we kind of get a sense before jumping into a discussion of where everyone's coming from, just so that everyone has a chance to
Yeah, I'd
share.
almost like to suggest that, I know everybody's looked through this and probably has comments, if we just go and let everyone put out their comments and I've sort of roughed out my top 5, but I have other comments too, if we could do that.
Let's just start with each
Okay.
council person.
Yeah.
I mean, not council.
Council person. Yeah.
Kate, you want to go start?
So we're just looking for our top 5. Yeah, All right. So my top priority is 4.1.1, the urban forestry, and then 4.1.2, and that's a lot of the 4s. 4.2.4 and 4.2.7 and 4.3.1.
Mine are, sorry. 1.1.1, 1.1.3, 2.1.1, 2.2.7, and 3.2.1.
Just a reminder, make sure you speak into the mic, because if you don't, it's hard to hear it on the recording.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
Do I need to do that again?
I'll just say I have 1.1.1, 1.1.3, 2.1.1, 2.2.7, 3.2.1.
Correct.
Perfect.
Thank you.
I think I screwed up because I just did the text from the thing. I didn't write down the number of the one, so I'll have to look up the numbers.
If you can read me the first sentence, then
Yeah.
I'll know which ones you're talking about.
So it's number 1 is work with EBCE to encourage opt-ups to Renewable 100.
It's 2.2.6.
Okay, thank you. Number 2 is create an electric vehicle action plan. 3 is research feasibility and emissions reduction impact of implementing a parking management strategy. 4 is pursue increasing the utility user tax for natural gas. And 5 is develop a new active transportation plan.
For me, number 1 would be 1.1.1, the active transportation plan. And then I kind of see 2.2.6 and 4.2.5 is connected, because 4.2.5 is update grid to support 100% renewable energy, and 2.2.6 is work with EBCE for 100% renewable energy. So if those are connected in that, it seems like one can't be done without the other. And then 2.2.7 is also kind of included with that, because if we deploy an outreach program for electrification, then it won't really do much if our electricity is coming from non-renewable sources. So I think those all clump together and that they build off of each other. So yeah, that's, and then 3.2.1, partnering with Stop Waste. A lot of that's just because I know a lot of Albany residents would prefer to use reusable or like biodegradable takeout ware as opposed to single-use plastic takeout ware. And then 4.1.1, urban forestry, because it's just kind of an overarching, yeah.
So I kind of looked at this in the sense of the next few years. So I prioritize things that are going to help us do a really accelerated drop in our carbon emissions, which meant a lot of the 3 and the 4s didn't fall into that, because although they do lend itself, we can't measure it. So if we're going to do again, this is like, what's our goal here with the cap? And right now, the only way to measure our goal is to hit this 60% at 35, which I think we should push to 60% at 30 still. So over the next, I think the highest priority ones are 1.1.3, because that's the only way we're going to affect people's use of cars in the city, is to hit them where they park them. 2.1.1, the all electric building requirements. 2.2.7, incentive program, which we need to have desperately if we're going to incentivize most of the people who own income property, and that's half of the housing. 2.2.12, well, no, not that one. 2.2.13 kind of falls under the same thing, existing building electrification strategy. We need to start on it now, even though it was the one long-term action. There were 39 near-term and 10 mid-term and 1 long-term, so that kind of is interesting. But existing building electrification, we need to start on it now. We can't put it off. If we don't solve what that is and have incentives and other things, it isn't going to happen.
Let's not discuss these now. Let's just get the list, and then we can discuss them. I thought that's what we were doing.
I'd actually suggest we could do a little discussion of them, but I'm more than happy to go on. Okay, 4.2.4.
So I would be generally in agreement with Nick. I think I was thinking of the transportation and the building measures as the leading priorities, since those are part of the cap, the emissions that are tracked and trackable. So for transportation, 1.2.4, which is the EV adoption plan, or greater EV adoption, and EV action plan, which is 1.2.1, and then parking permit management, I think similar to others, which is 1.1.3. And then for buildings, I had, let's see, the utility tax, 2.2.8, and measures to electrify existing buildings, 2.2.13, and outreach, 2.2.7. And I just echo what Nick said. I think 3 and 4 are admirable and important, but they're challenging to measure and to track.
So is it useful for you to have some discussion now from us, or should we have some what do you think? Comments from public? Or?
Is there a way you could put on the screen what the measures that everybody was, that way we can kind of see if there's a trend? Yes. Or consensus around certain measures.
So from from what I have, that looks like a consensus, starting in the ones is 1.1.1, 1.1.3, 1.2.1. Yes, those are the ones that came up multiple times for the ones. One point 2.1 was the last one.
Tom, you were thinking more of like,
I was thinking, if,
so we can see a grouping of like which
yeah, I mean,
items were.
if we can see where there's, consensus around certain things and then come to an agreement, then we could talk about the things that we don't agree about. Focus on that, or if there's still 8 or 9
Right.
items.
So from a quick tally, is there
Yeah.
a couple that are like high in consensus?
So I think the ones that came up from, I have 1.1.1, 1.1.3, 1.1.1, 1.1.3, 1.1.1, 1.1.3, 1.2.4, 1.2.1, 1.1.3. So 1.1.3, there's, yeah,
So 1.1.1 and 1.1.3
come up the most.
most.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the.
So I think we have our feedback for that.
That sounds like those 2 out of the 5. Or is there anybody that doesn't think that?
Well, if this is the method by which the priority is set is just by our adding them together, I would disagree with that. I think we should talk about why we think they're important. I think there's also the issue of the strategies behind this implementation and how it's going to happen. I don't think it's just filling out a spreadsheet. I think it has to be more robust, and there has to be a strategic plan, and I'm wondering how we're going to develop that.
The only reason why I was saying that is because we've been working on these, so we're all familiar with, why they're in there, because we think they're important. And some we think obviously are more important than others, to the point of.
Right.
So I was just trying to streamline things, because if everybody agrees on those first 2 things, we can spend a lot of time talking about why we agree about that, but then we wouldn't be able to spend as much time about some of the other things that there seems to be less consensus on.
I just want to hear more about a overall strategy for how this is implemented. I guess that's
For how
what-
we're implementing the climate action
Right.
plan?
Prioritizing.
Right.
Well, maybe one suggestion, Nick, is we could also go by the groups, like group 1 to group 4. And it sounds like we're on group 1 now, so maybe just if, these are 2 leading options, or 2 popular options, 1.1.1, active transportation, 1.1.3, which is parking management, which appear to have some consensus, but if there's strong opinions otherwise from the committee, either that we're omitting something or we shouldn't be prioritizing these, and I think maybe that's fine to discuss here. Eric, what'd you say?
Well, I had Nick's same thought of like, this is nice to have our input, but is there a plan for how we're prioritizing this?
The plan for prioritization is, let me pull up this. We're going to prioritize based on the factors that will influence funding and so what will influence implementation prioritization, which like the implementation plan itself, will probably fluctuate a lot, I'm imagining. I don't think we're going to be able to say, like, here's what we're going to do if we don't have funding, because things will change. But it'll be based on strategic goals and priorities from council, funding availability, technology and resources, priorities of partner agencies and what their timelines are on actions, our greenhouse gas reductions potential of action, and then your CAC priorities.
Okay, yeah, I mean, you.
Yeah.
That's fine.
So-
So it feels
Can I-
like then maybe some discussion from our committee would be
Yeah,
pertinent. I mean, let's use this time to get our comments out in front of.
sure.
Yeah, I think what we want to take away from this meeting is what are your biggest priorities that you want to see, like, us start to tackle in the next 2 years? And I know it's all of them. Obviously, we want to implement this plan all the time. But if we have a good sense of, like, what you as the CAC and as representatives of the community, what you think will be the most feasible and what we should really try to get started on with the time we have, that would be helpful for us.
So let's go ahead and just make it an open forum here. Let's try to give everybody a chance to get their opinions out. But let's go ahead and.
And I think we have consensus that 1.1.3 and 1.1.1 we noted our priorities, so, yeah.
So if we do the committee, and then we'll open up for public comment to get the public's input as well. Okay? Anybody want to start off?
Sure. So basically, when I looked at this, it was kind of interesting that 40 out of 50 are sort of near-term approaches. Then we have 10 midterm and 1 long. So, and the long one, we definitely need to, it being long is something that we need to start on soon, or we won't be able to solve it, which was the existing building electrification strategy. So when I looked at prioritizing these for myself, I think I took greenhouse gas reduction potential as the highest priority. Frankly, if the city council comes up with politically different goals, that's sort of contrary to what the whole climate action plan is about, which is addressing the immediate crisis, which we have the next 10 years to really do something significant about. So I would argue that our focus must be on the carbon reduction items that are going to be the most effective and could potentially be the most challenging to bring about. I'm really happy to see everyone supported the parking management strategy, but I guarantee you politically that's going to be a really difficult thing to do in this town. But we're going to try to do it, and the effort's going to go there rather than it just demurring away if it gets city council up in a knot. So I guess my thought about the strategy was I think the strategy should be more trying to focus on the items that are going to give us the best reductions, even though they may be challenging. But we should then work to find the partnerships to make those happen and to work together and to bring in the volunteers and to bring in the expertise to do that. And maybe some of the more nicer ones, like promote low carbon food choices, we can just sort of let those maybe go a little bit. No, I mean, no one prioritized that. I'm not saying we should, but I'm just saying there's a lot of stuff in here that we can put on the back burner. So that's my little spiel for how I came up with the ones that are important. They do all pivot around electrification, and I think those tie in nicely with what we just heard about with the KALB Green tiers. We can link those together really well. So I would push that we make our priorities around those items that will move us rapidly at this critical point in time now towards those goals, and defer the ones that are maybe not as critical.
Great, thanks. Anybody else want to?
No, I mean, I essentially agree that the focus should be on ones and twos. But I also thought the reason why I had 3.2.1 in there is because we have a waste crisis, and I think the city needs to take a stand to be changing that in the commercial sector. And I think it's something that is happening in other cities. It's certainly doable, and we should be pursuing that. But I agree with what Nick's point is. We really need to be focusing on these, the parking in particular. This has been something that people have been talking about in the city since I moved here over 30 years ago. And it's nuts that we have basically free parking, unregulated parking, and transportation is so tied to our emissions profile that, you know, there's only a few ways we can impact that, and a parking policy would address that at least, along with active transportation planning.
Hear, hear.
I just think we have to do something.
Oh.
I think I generally agree with Nick and with Tom. And I do think that greenhouse gas reduction is the urgent priority. Some of these I think might be able to proceed in parallel, like maybe this 3.2.1, which is like a very specific proposal, as I read it, to adopt an ordinance to move away from disposables. That could potentially be something in parallel, or perhaps something that could be a partnership. Well, Stop Waste is listed here. I think other cities may also be interested in reducing the amount of disposables or making it harder to use disposables or less convenient. So there may be opportunities there. But I do agree that transportation is a big gorilla in the room, and that active transportation and electrification are maybe two pillars, and those are two broad pillars. I was in support of, in my list of priorities, I had some for EV action plan and or EV outreach. But maybe the parking management plan can be a way to also do some of that. If we start talking about parking fees or parking management, then that will get people's attention, and it could be an opportunity. And I do think it'll be very difficult, and may not be that feasible in reality, but I think it's something that we should explore and try, at least, not give up and say we can't be done. So I just think that there's opportunities to bundle some of these other concepts to say, hey, you can actually afford an alternative vehicle. You can actually charge within your own household footprint. You can go to San Jose. So those sorts of things are opportunities as well. But I feel that those are the two key things there. So if we focus on those two, then we kind of cover a lot.
I'm going to add in just a quick comment about 3.2.1 specifically. We're actually currently working with Stop Waste in some other cities in a working group to discuss single-use plastics, utensils and food packaging, takeoutware, et cetera. So that one's listed as ongoing. So
It's
already kind of in progress. Yeah.
Maybe that's not.
That might just help,
Yeah.
guide the discussion.
Okay.
It's on the list. Yeah. Do we want to take a look at the twos?
Yeah, I think so.
I agree with the pillars of electrification and transportation. I was just thinking, as for like the point I brought up earlier about 2.2.6 and 4.2.5 being connected. As far as, it's kind of concerning to me that our current grid cannot support 100% renewable. Is that what it means, that our current grid cannot support 100% renewable?
It's that it can support, and also we don't have 100% renewable yet. So I think that one is advocacy on the state level for, I think, both of those things, right? Or is that just grid point 2? Oh. Yeah, it's kind of how I see that one is it's a mix of advocating for making it easier for whole communities to electrify without totally blowing up the grid, also having more renewables to draw from. So it's just advocacy for renewables and electrification.
Okay.
Yeah, but you bring up a good point that that's probably coupled with
Yeah.
other actions.
And then the idea of deploying an outreach and incentive program for electrification. I think that kind of, I mean, the whole like incentive idea, like nothing's really going to happen unless we incentivize people to do it. I think that's all connected, especially kind of to know what Nick was saying. Yeah, and then that's basically it. I mean, I always focus a lot on transportation because biking is very important to me, and I feel like way more people should be biking, and Albany's a great town for biking in. Could be better, but it's as it is, it's possible. So just encouraging more people to get out of their cars in any way possible is, yeah.
And I just also, just in terms of urgency, I think 4.1.1 is up there on urgency because I know that condos are coming in off of Pierce Street Park that was originally designated for a park area, and that there's 11 acres of Albany Hill that's like going to be developed. So I think Albany is also at a really big risk right now of losing its urban forestry that's currently existing. So I'd put that on the urgent list.
Thanks. So I kind of did my priorities on the greenhouse gas reductions, and the transportation and the electrification are the biggest components of that. But I tend to focus more on the transportation part because I think that there's a really nice confluence of sort of public opinion, technology availability, the desire for people to get active and different transportation, and the visibility that that has, for just the public to get some momentum about changing behaviors and changing the way they do things. So I tended to focus more on transportation because of that. I think the building codes and all that is really good stuff, and we should totally get in there and start doing that because it's going to be a long term for remodels and new houses. But I think transportation to me is the biggest opportunity short term to really influence personal behavior and get people biking, walking, converting their car that they're going to turn over every 5 years into something non-fossil fuel burning. So I think there's a real opportunity there for the short-term win.
Can I ask a question about the urban forestry plan? What is our urban forester doing, if not this? Why is that list is not started? Do you think that would be part of their job description, though?
I think a lot of the focus of the urban forester right now is on tree removals for uplifting sidewalks. That's what a lot of the Parks and Recs meetings are about.
So I'm not an expert on our urban forestry program and what he's doing, but the vision for this action is that we'd create a new plan that really addresses both existing trees and then also how to get more trees in the ground, increasing canopy cover, which I think it does take a plan to determine where are we going to put them in, how, what kind of trees, logistically, with sidewalks, what do we need to do, what do we need to change that we're currently doing, so it'll require, maybe bringing in some technical expertise. So that's where this one is like a step up from what we're currently doing.
Yeah, I actually had a meeting with, what is his name is?
John Hawkridge.
Yeah, John Hawkridge, and then I also brought in the urban forester from El Cerrito, who I know personally, Stephen Prey, and really talked about what the challenges are, because I was thinking we could do a combined sort of urban forestry thing. Richmond has a really good program called Richmond Tree, which is a volunteer group. But you've got one person for thousands of trees in Albany, and they're spending most of their time just evaluating trees that people want removed and trying to get some trees in where they're not, and looking at the parks and the public areas and running around like crazy and trying to keep, probably dealing with contracts for tree trimming. And so they're really running around ragged and trying to do something like a database that lists every single tree, species, size, health, for thousands of trees is just something they can't whip out. So they'll need a volunteer effort, and I think that's something that volunteers could definitely help with.
Should we open it up for public comment? So any comments from the public? Want to add on to the prioritization opinions?
And just real quickly too, I also have noted, just based on the numbers, the action listing we did in the beginning, that 4.1.1 is also a priority, if everyone agrees with that, kind of what the discussion just sounded like too. Cool.
Hi, thanks staff, fellow committee. Preston Jordan. I think for priorities, I would suggest focusing on 1.1.1. Obviously, it's a plan that needs to be done. And I would suggest adding, in terms of the metric, a date by which it will be done, because we don't want the city waiting around 5 years for funding to get it done. The city's actually, in fact, already 3 years, 4 years past due, according to regional policy. So I think it should have a date in there, and if the city can't get a grant, then the city is going to have to foot the bill so we can move forward. And I would say the EV plan, I would put that above the parking plan. In order to getting that going, I think the reality is, given the layout of our city and how hard and expensive it is to change the layout, that kind of like what happened with EBCE, where we just zeroed that out by going to, I think it was Brilliant 100. I think the biggest win for transportation is going to be supporting EV rollout, which may be a surprise because obviously I'm here mostly talking about active transportation usually, but I don't see that we're going to be able to increase active transportation so dramatically given the infrastructure in our city and how hard it is to change. I mean, we'll change it at the margin. We might change it from 12% walking, biking mode share to 14%. The goal on the cap was actually 15% by 2020. I don't know if we're going to make that, but I think it's EV that's really going to make the change. And because it takes a long time to build that infrastructure, I would encourage you to prioritize that. I think parking could wait because parking is going to become a more politically tractable issue with time. Since the council has reduced the off-street parking requirements, there's a lot more housing relative to Albany that's been proposed. That's going to make parking on the street that much more difficult. So I think if you wait a little bit, you're going to have more and more blocks clamoring for something to happen on parking rather than trying to shove it on them. So I would put that 2 years out. As far as buildings, I would prioritize the utility user tax because the revenue from that can then support what I would also prioritize after that, which is the pathway to electrification of existing buildings. I would prioritize the utility user tax because there's other cities that have joined in and are interested in this. Albany only puts measures on the ballot every 2 years, so the window is now for doing that. If you don't do it now, it's going to be 3 years from now. So I would encourage you to take that up immediately. And then 4.1.1, again, because trees take a long time to grow, and that's, I would say, the leading resilience measure, adaptation measure for the city, which is part of the new plan is adaptation. I think I've shown graphs that the max daily temperature has gone up 5 degrees in the last 30 years on average, on an annual average. So we need the shade, and we do need a plan. For instance, there's places where the curb is too short between two driveways for a parking space. You could actually repurpose that for a tree. I mean, right now, a lot of the streets only have like a 1 foot width for a tree. Portland only has like a 1 to 1.5 foot wide landscape strip, which is, you're never going to get a tree that makes a difference in terms of adaptation and shading and canopy in a space that size. So planning really does need to occur to figure out, okay, how are we going to use our space to actually get bigger trees that make a difference in terms of our temperature?
Thanks.
Hi, good evening again, Ian McLeod. I agree with the greenhouse gas reduction approach. What gets you the most bang for your buck immediately? That would be our all electrification ordinance as a long-term goal for remodels. Hopefully the ordinance for new construction goes through pretty smoothly. We get over this little speed bump with the lawsuits. Beyond that, I would really encourage working on incentivizing fuel switching, and this is really doable. I think it means doing research, finding out where the funding can come from, and then aggregating sources to provide rebates and incentives to give people money back when they do this work. And I saw an example in San Jose where they're providing $4,000 as a rebate for putting in a heat pump water heater, which pretty much covers the cost. And that also includes some of the installation costs. So if San Jose is providing $4,000, why aren't we providing $4,000? Bayren provides some funds, PG&E provides some rebates, incentives. East Bay Community Energy could kick in money, but I think it's really, really important to aggregate all of this to make it kind of one-stop shopping so consumers can just go to one place, know where all the forms are, and get pretty much the whole thing paid for as far as the installation and equipment goes. And that will get us moving quicker than almost anything else we can do while we're waiting for some all-electrical ordinance for remodels. But in the meantime, let's incentivize it, and money talks, and that it's outreach, education, but making people aware of the money that's available. Like Bayren, and it can go on our Albany, our carbon-free Albany website, and there are line items there, but it shouldn't be at the very bottom when you go through some, item, and it's way down at the bottom. It should be banner ad, top of it, say, look, you can get money back for this, significant money. So I think we need to make that a priority. Beyond that, I agree the active transportation plan is going to take time to implement. I'm all for protected bike lanes. I think the metric should be not just low stress, but which type, or a metric of all types, class 1, class 2, et cetera, class 4, and how many miles we have of each one kind of thing. I think the only way we're really going to make a big modal shift is to get class 4 protected bike lanes on our major streets. It improves safety, gets people out on their bikes, reduces vehicle miles traveled, reduces emissions, et cetera. It ties into housing policy. New housing projects will have fewer car parking requirements, so we're going to have to provide options for the 50% of residents that don't have parking spaces. So we don't want them to be parking cars around a corner or down the street. We want them to go outside on their bicycles into a protected bike lane, go to Oakland, go to BART, et cetera. So it's kind of an integrated strategy, housing and active transportation infrastructure. And I'm all for trees. I love it. When, if I can go over a little bit, about 15 years ago, we had a block party. We had our Albany urban forester propose a bunch of trees. We got all our neighbors together. We had a great day. We planted about 15 trees on our street. And now they're starting to become mature trees. Some are growing slower than others, but that's also a great community building event. People are really positive. They take ownership of their neighborhood. The neighborhoods look much more attractive, reduces the heat island effect, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think we all know the values there, but that also could be part of the strategy, is doing block parties and getting all that going that way. So thank you very much.
Thanks. Thank you. Any other comments, questions? So does that give you some input? Any other questions about or things we can offer on the implementation priorities?
This is great feedback. I actually have a lot of very good notes. I think it was, just speaking personally, I liked how a lot of you brought together multiple measures. Sometimes you don't think of it that way, so that was good feedback. I guess the last thing, we also had an ask if anyone has, if you've taken a look at the implementation plan and you have ideas for what can be potential metrics, with the asterisk that we want to make sure all metrics are easily measured, because at the staff level, we really want to make sure that we can actually implement the plan and we're not just worried about tracking metrics. So if we're chasing down PG&E data all the time, it will make it harder to make a plan to reduce the amount of energy used. So just with that caveat. But if anyone has, that was the one area where we were looking at it and we thought, oh, we could really get some feedback about creative ways we could measure things to see how we're tracking implementation.
How much access do you guys have to AC Transit data?
I don't know.
Okay.
So that tells you my access to it. I can find out.
Okay. Because that might be, if just measuring public transportation, active transportation, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad you touched on the point of some of the interconnectedness, because I noticed that also with the grid resiliency and then the electrification. And And one thing I was thinking of, why I was pushing the parking issue a bit more, is you can start gearing parking fees to types of car. So if you have a car parked on the road and it's an ICE car, you have to pay more per year than if it's an EV, and maybe that's free. So you can incentivize, parking can be a methodology for incentivizing people to make the right choices in their vehicles too. So I think there's a lot of linkages between these, and then I think the aspect of having incentives is really key too. I mean, a couple people in the audience put that out, and when I looked through all the public comments on the draft cap, people were really asking are there going to be incentives? Are there going to be rebates? These are the things they really want because they see the cost coming and mandatory measures and things that do them. So if we build in ahead of time, there might be a little pain for something, but oh, hey, look, if you do this, then, and one will pay for the other. So I think this is where I think the strategy comes into play, that we try to look for those. So I'm going to pour through this a bit more and give you my thoughts on where I think some of these things can support one another. I think that's a good thing. I encourage other people to look at it.
As far as just things like, I mean, they weren't stated as priorities, but 1.1.6, work with third-party programs to provide shared e-mobility options. Seems like a pretty good metric for that would be the number of e-mobility options, like how much they're using. Could you guys give us just an idea of which companies you're thinking of? I know Lime had a short stint in Albany, or like Ford Go Bikes or something like that.
So that's a complicated question. Okay. We're not,
Scooters.
we can't like seek out certain companies over others as a government agency, so I don't know, but it'll kind of depend on who comes to us and how the landscape changes. Right now, I know we have Gig. I don't know if there will be other e-mobilities options out there later too. Yeah, that's my roundabout answer. I don't know if you have.
Just as a question about it overall, is car sharing an aspect of any of these things like city car share, or is it in the?
Yeah, we included, because that was something that came up a lot throughout the process, was what's the difference between ride share and car share, and people had very strong opinions. So I know we defined it, so it's definitely in there. There are distinctions between the two.
Okay.
Yeah. So I guess, because everyone's concern was, and what our concern is too, we don't want more, single passenger, single use vehicles on the road. We want fewer vehicles with more people in them. Okay. That's how we're going to get, yeah.
Great. And then as far as just tree metrics, is there like I know like basal area is the idea of like imagine you take a cross section of every tree, the area of the trunk. That's probably a little bit hard for you guys to measure, going around with like a tape measure for every tree. But as far as like tree metrics, do you have, I'm sure there's statistics on the number of trees already on Albany, and maybe a goal for like doubling coverage or increasing it by 1/3 or something that seems feasible like that. And then we can work in increasing the number of trees where possible to meet that goal.
I think that was that measure 4 point.
Yeah, no, but she's asking about metrics, so
Yeah.
a number.
Because that study would get at what you're driving at, which would be, there's some way of counting, maybe from satellite imagery or whatever, the shading provided by the trees. I'm sure there's.
Yeah, right now we have tree canopy cover as a percentage for a metric, but you're suggesting we look at, or you were
No,
asking
tree canopy
that?
cover as a percentage for a metric sounds great. Yeah.
Yeah, so kind of a suggestion, that was a good comment. Actually, our metrics should work towards be something that supports or can support the goals we're shooting for. So I would say an activity, this action should have a goal, and then the metric should be able to measure your progress to the goal.
So that would be a new column.
Well, however you do it, I'm just saying the metric should support analyzing whether you're achieving the goal. I mean, it sounds obvious, but I mean, that's just
But doesn't that go to, when we were debating the cap, that was a point we brought up, which was, how long do we have to do that particular thing? Because we have a list, all these lists, and I get that that's why you want us to prioritize. But having a target associated with it so that you're going to do X by.
right. I'm thinking like San Jose has like a certain number of EVs in the city by a certain date, so somehow and it might be good to look at other cities, how they've metricized their climate action plans. Of course, a city like San Jose has a lot more people power to do that. So, I mean, this is a huge effort. I mean, it's still mind-boggling to me. And although we do have a certain amount of time, we don't have to do everything tomorrow. So I think it's really, I mean, with these priority ones, working out, efficient ways to do them, and hopefully piggybacking on what other municipalities have done and sharing efforts with them would be a good way to do it.
So I heard you say what we can do is bring back suggestions on metrics. So we're talking about for like next meeting, right? So maybe each committee member can take their items and start thinking about metrics and bring that back for discussion next meeting, would be one action item for committee, right?
We did have another action item for the committee too, so it depends on what kind of workload you want to take on. We were hoping in January to add another column, which is CAC role, because we keep hearing from you guys that you really want to have a role in implementing this, and there's a certain level where some of the things, like taking on an EV action plan, probably no one on the CAC will be able to do that because you'd have to be, here every day thinking about it and working with people. But a lot of the things like doing outreach or talking to people about what is available and like, hey, we're doing this plan, here's how you can get involved, like working with the community to have a role in implementing some of these things. We would love feedback about that. And I kind of see that as being a big task if you're to go back and think about what measures you could see having a role for and what that would be and proposing that. So that's what we were hoping to discuss in January.
Okay.
Can you send out the list from today's, is that going to be before we get the minutes, so we don't have to wait till a few days before the meeting to get a list of like what everybody,
Yeah, it'd be interesting to
Their
get
5
that, like the
priorities?
complete list of what everybody said as their
Yeah.
5, and then like the tick marks of how many votes each one got.
yeah,
Like the ones that had more than one? Yeah.
I think
okay.
that would be good for us to.
I also documented it so I could share that with
Oh.
everybody. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Because, personally, my mind changed as I heard the discussion and the public comments, so
Yeah.
that'd be a good way to refresh my memory.
That brings up another, I'm sorry.
Do you have more next steps? Okay. That's the one. Okay,
Yeah.
good. That's good. Right.
So are you open to us just, we probably, just like time, a lot of thoughts have been generated. So I've got this little summary I put together and I could do a little write-up. Is it okay to send you that? And then are you open for receiving ongoing information from us in that way, or?
I think if you're sending it to me as an individual, like you as an individual sending it to me and
Yeah, and I
like
wouldn't
as a
copy
CAC
anybody else, so
conversation,
I wouldn't get into the Brown Act stuff, but just getting.
like your thoughts
can
from the meeting.
Any of us send you more thoughts and information on this?
Yeah, that could work.
And then I was going to, Lizzie and I talked at the agenda planning meeting, and this is something that I think would help the committee. I wanted to bring it up here for like a future agenda item would be to have the consultant or somebody, representative from a different climate action committee in the area, kind of talk about how they, their experiences with implementation and prioritization. Because I think we've got a huge list, really complicated. This is none of our, maybe some of your expertise, but it's not mine. And I just think it'd be interesting to have somebody come in and share their experiences with it, if possible. And Lizzie, we were talking about this a little bit, and it's, maybe challenging to find somebody, but I would like to, I just wanted to see if the committee would be interested in that for a future meeting.
Yeah, I would, yeah. I think that's a great idea.
So if we can put it on as a future agenda item, when possible. So.
Did we have?
I had a question about the metrics. So for the EV action plan, I think there are the number of charging stations, public, and also the number of vehicles. So I think it would be good to track that, and also like the levels of charging, like level 2 and level 3. Do we have that current data, or do we have the ability to collect the data for the type of drivetrains, like EV versus ICE versus diesel? I mean, anything else, or not?
Claire says we have something from the DMV. We've shared it before. We'll look into it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I have seen some data from other cities, like Fremont, in the past. So I would guess that it should be, available. But that would be good data to get and to start tracking.
So we've got about 7 minutes for the meeting, and I saw Preston's, you wanted to make a comment? Do you want to go ahead?
So in terms of goals, I would suggest looking at the previous plan because it had hard goals in it, like 90% of the cycling network implemented by 2020, 15% mode share by 2020. And so without those, this is a step backwards, I would say. And as I guess an anecdote of the utility of that, so we still have 90% of our cycling network implemented, even though it's mostly paint and signs, which is kind of amazing. But nonetheless, I think having that in there is part of what's motivated the system to potentially get it done sometime in 2020. So I think there is utility to that. I would also encourage the committee to think about passing a motion next time as to which 5, 6, 4, whatever, 5 isn't a magic number, but pass a motion regarding what your priorities are. Because I've seen at other times without a motion, it can just kind of float away and not be taken seriously or as seriously. So, yeah. And as far as the EVs, an interesting problem there is even if we went to 100% EV in Albany, currently the way I think our inventory is constructed, unless I'm incorrect, is it looks at the county-wide average fleet. And so, if we promote EVs here, we're not necessarily going to get any win on our inventory given the way it's currently calculated. So you might look at how the inventory is calculated in that regard, because we're not going to know where we are. We're not going to know if we're doing better or worse, the same with the current metric that's available.
All right, thanks.
Thanks.
All right. Any other comments?
Just had an idea that maybe
Less than 5
we
minutes.
could enlist some of the kids in AUSD, and they could, as part of their project, measure the trunk diameters of trees and also do an inventory of all the vehicles to get real data, or at least a sample
Yeah,
for
no.
30% of the blocks.
I did my project. I did my EdSet junior poster project last year, which Bianca had a chance to see today, on like paper and tree like farm sustainability, and like that's where I learned the term basal tree area. It's an interesting measure, which I don't think would be very feasible in with our resources, but the amount that trees cover is a significantly better measure for our purposes. How do we get that from satellite data, or how? Cool.
We'll find out when we do a tree plan.
Okay. Now you should put sensors covering the carpet of Albany, and then shine a network of lasers over the top and see where it hits and see where it doesn't. I'm joking.
All right. Any other future agenda items to suggest? All right, well, I would move that we adjourn the meeting.
Second.
Adjourned.
You can just adjourn it. Meeting adjourned.
You are looking for a gavel?